Hello, my fellow sensitive people. It is I, Whimsy, the Oracle of Whimsy, here to deliver last night's remote viewing, and I decided to record it for people who complain that the live streams are sometimes freezing, and they also can't sit for an hour, so I totally get that. I had close to, I think it was over 70 questions. I did last night's remote. I did in 2 stages. I did a remote for about 20-30 minutes. I took a break, got up, stretched a little, went and had some cookies and milk. It seems to be my tradition. So last night when I did the remote, I was listening to a particular mantra which I wanted to share with people. And this was the mantra I was listening to when I got into the 3rd step of the 5-step technique. And for those people who are not familiar, we do a 5-step meditation technique for remote viewing. And during the 3rd step, it's called the abiding. And that is when a person abides in spirit and love and puts himself in a very safe, loving space where they can abide with a loving, benign universe. So the mantra I was listening to was Krishna Das, and the mantra was, I have found a place to live in the presence of the Lord. That was the mantra. I have found a place to live in the presence of the Lord. So that was what I was meditating on in the abiding state. And it brought my mind to this idea of ultimately the question that, it goes back to the question of you and I, how do we create a world that we can be happy in? And it starts with examining one's own conscience and whether or not one is at peace with oneself. So when you're doing your nightly meditations and you're abiding in yourself, asking if you are at peace with yourself or if you are in conflict with yourself. So this abiding state has been referred to as abiding in spirit, abiding in Christ, abiding in your higher conscience, the moral and ethical aspects of the brain. For those people who are atheist, it's the innate part of yourself which can look at situations objectively, the wise counsel that all of us have when we're not just responding to things emotionally. So an example of a personal conflict I have is the difference between a vegetarian diet versus a meat diet, right? I'm not totally okay with the fact that I eat meat, but I feel better when I eat meat. I feel much better when I eat some animal product. So it's something that I'm working out when I go into the meditative state, and it's an area of conflict for me. Another area of conflict for me is charity, how much charity to give. This channel, we give a lot of charity, but then you also think, well, am I going to be able to make my rent this month? The balance between being an ethical person and a charitable person and being somebody that can take care of themselves. So that was the first takeaway from last night's meditation, was that the real function of these meditations, certainly steps 1, 2, and 3, is to get comfortable with oneself, and in a place where one is not defended, examine the parts of ourselves that we have conflict with and ask ourselves, are we at peace with how we are living our lives? Are we at peace with our own ethics? Are we okay with how we conduct ourselves? Are we okay with how we conduct our behavior in relationship to others and in relationship to how we treat ourselves. Are we treating ourselves as well as we should treat ourselves? Are we eating the way that we should be eating? Or is it 6 Oreo cookies and a glass of milk every night? And if you are doing that every night, are you okay with that? So that's the first takeaway for how do we get to peace? How do we create a peaceful 2020? How do we go forward creating a beautiful world? It's to use these meditative states not to think of the creator or God consciousness is as some being that's standing in judgment of ourselves, but as us taking a moment to make an account and reckoning for our own lives and ask, are we okay with our own behavior? So it was a new way of looking at abiding, that abiding is an opportunity with compassion and love for ourselves to check in and say, am I okay with my actions? Am I okay with my behavior? Or is there something in my behavior that needs to be modified? The second, then I moved on to the fourth stage of the remote. There was a lot of questions about when is Trump going to leave. I didn't, for whatever reason, that is not what came up for me. Instead, what came up for me is Trump as a symbol of everything that is the stereotypical ugly American. That Trump represents for all of us, and certainly globally, the stereotype of the ugly American. That Trump is not an accident. He is actually a caricature which we look at and which the world looks at and says, yes, that is the ugly underbelly of America. That we grow up being told America is the greatest country on earth, we're a wonderful country, and we never see America from the perspective of the other. And stepping back from America and looking at America from the perspective of the other, Trump is the perfect archetype. Loud, obnoxious, a bully, over-consuming, sexist, uneducated, rude, no manners, arrogant, thinks he's better than everybody else, lives on junk food, may possibly have, there's some evidence of not only mental health challenges, but possibly a drug addiction. But the main thing is over-consumerism, eating massive amounts of food, experimenting possibly with drug use, exploitation of others, exploiting workers, exploiting employees, random acts of violence and bullying if others do not give him what he wants, intense immaturity, extremely dangerous, a dangerous, immature fool with massive military power that is threatening the entire world and doesn't see just how ignorant and grotesque the character is. So the lesson of Trump, when I meditated on when will Trump leave, when America sees what Trump is, that he is the caricature, he is the epitome of what the ugly American is to the rest of the world. And he stands as a symbol of that we should all look at. This is you. This is the ugly American. This is the bombing of Libya. and just go and tell Americans that you're liberating the Libyans, even though we completely decimated the infrastructure, and it was horrific for Libya. It was killing 500,000 people in Iraq, terrorizing people, threatening people, forcing people to buy our products, embargoes at exorbitant rates so that we can continue to get rich and consume more stuff. And you're going to do this whether you like it or not, and we're going to bully you into it. So that is the function of Trump. The function of Trump is for Americans to look at this ugly aspect of ourselves. And when we get that, and when we decide that we are going to be living our lives differently based on a different set of values, he will become insignificant because he will have served his purpose. And so the question has to become, have we had enough? Have we examined our own consumerism, our own grotesque behavior towards ourselves, towards others, our vampant, vain need to impress others, which is really bad manners, by the way. Throwing in front of other people's faces what you have, people who have not, which seems to be really popular here in Los Angeles, is actually quite gauche. It's quite a grotesque and bad manners in the rest of the world. It's considered bad manners to flaunt what you have in front of those who have not. So that's ultimately the question I took away is, have we had enough of all of that? And when we've had enough of all of that and begun to ask ourselves if we have found a place for ourselves in the presence of the spiritual, the divine, the higher consciousness, or are we living based on our own personal standards of what living a moral life is? When we work that out, Trump will have served his purpose and will no longer have any power. The second aspect of this meditation was the fourth stage, when I was trying to connect with someone else, and I connected with Lindsey Graham. So Lindsey Graham came in pretty strong last night, and this was very powerful. Lindsey Graham said, listen to the whole thing, and then we'll talk about it. He said, "The president has made a laughing stock of me in front of the world, and I am through with him. I am tired of being treated like a whore. My relationship with this president has sowed seeds of discontent with others that can never be repaired." I'm assuming he means Joe Biden, but possibly other people in the Democratic Party as well. In plainer words, he risked everything for this president. He now feels like he's being treated like a fallen woman. That's kind of, like he's being treated, well, he used the word whore, but so something appears to be going on where Trump is basically treating people very, very badly. He's not trying even to be nice to them, and saying he's ordering people about, and if you don't give him what he wants, then he's becoming extremely abusive. And unfortunately, Lindsey Graham is one of the people he has begun to turn on. And perhaps it's because Lindsey Graham had made some critical statements about him recently, but there's a conflict starting to emerge there. It also, I also got the impression, because when I was in that remote, that Donald Trump was sending attack dogs to intimidate people in Congress. That was the other thing that came up. So then I was asked to take a look at the environment, and I saw shields, standing shields that were going to be able to protect crops. And this looked like they were like satellites. So they were like satellite structures that were almost like a dome. It was almost like they blocked the sun, but they were like, but because they were satellites, they seemed to be somewhat stationary, and they were able to stay over specific areas, and they quite effectively were able to drop the temperature in those areas. So it looks like those satellites are going to be going up to dramatically drop temperatures. It's not a cure-all, but it will take care of a lot of the problems, at least temporarily, with rising temperatures. The other thing that was kind of interesting is that there's new advances in chemistry that are going to be coming out that help neutralize existing chemicals. So toxic chemicals that have hit the watershed, toxic chemicals that are entering into the soil, etc. They're coming up with interesting new ways to neutralize them with chemistry. So they're going in with chemistry, heat and processing, and actually that's going to be the way to get rid of some of these chemical waste. So that was it. That was as far as I got on the remotes. I didn't get to all 70-something questions, but I think the main takeaway from last night's remote was that we all continue to do our nightly meditations, or, however we are connecting with our higher selves, and begin to examine our own ethics and our own way of doing things. And when we return to those basic ethics, the power of this president will be greatly diminished. The other thing that's going to start happening is that a lot of truth is going to start coming out about the economy. That if you keep telling people the economy is great and people keep believing it, that is the ace in the hole for this president. But the reality, the reality of the economy is that we are bankrupted. People are buying tiny houses because they're out on the streets. Homelessness is up. Nobody can afford rent in major cities. People are having further and further commutes because they can't live in the cities, which is creating a lot of depression and frustration for people. The truth of what's really going on for the average citizen who can't pay their rent, who's being forced into micro homes, or is even, and the fact that some people are bankrupted due to health concerns and winding up on the streets, that is the real economy, and that's going to be a lot of the discussion going forward, rather than the myth of the economy doing great for the average American, which it isn't. And if the Democrats can really begin to talk about what's really going on in the cities and the rising homelessness problem and housing crisis, then it's going to put us at an advantage going forward in 2020. All right, thanks everybody for watching this remote. If you're still trying to get in for an appointment, you can go to tarotwithwhimsy.com, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.